Number 7. DALIA DIPPOLITO. On the morning of August the 5th of 2009, Florida woman DALIA DIPPOLITO was at the gym when she received a phone call from local police requesting her to return home immediately. When she arrived at her Palm Beach County residence, the 26-year-old newlywed discovered that her house had become the scene of a criminal investigation. Detectives informed DIPPOLITO that her husband Michael had been gunned down inside their home earlier that morning. The woman, who broke down into tears upon hearing the news, was subsequently taken to the police station to be interviewed. Investigators asked DIPPOLITO if she knew of anyone who might have wanted to harm Michael. She allegedly responded by stating that her husband had been on probation and that he'd been having problems since his release from jail. Shortly thereafter, DIPPOLITO was placed under arrest for solicitation of murder, prompting her once again to break into tears as she desperately maintained her innocence. As had already been uncovered by local investigators, DIPPOLITO had concocted a greed-fueled plot to have her husband killed so that she'd inherit all of his assets. She'd been caught on surveillance footage telling an undercover police officer posing as a hitman to murder Michael. The exchange provided enough probable cause for the authorities to obtain a warrant for her arrest. The fake crime scene at DIPPOLITO's home helped lure her to the police station, where she could be taken into custody without incident. The former escort's defense team argued in court that the entire murder-for-hire plot had been staged for a reality television show. In May of 2011, however, DIPPOLITO was found guilty of solicitation to commit first-degree murder by a jury that had only deliberated for about 3 hours. The judge presiding over her case, who called her a greedy, manipulative, and evil woman, sentenced her to 20 years in prison. Number 6. Tommy Gilbert. Tommy Gilbert went to his parents' high-rise New York City apartment on January the 4th of 2015 to speak with his father, a wealthy hedge fund manager, about a reduction in his weekly allowance. As was detailed in subsequent reports, the 37-year-old had previously been given $800 per week by his parents, who also paid his $2,400 rent every month. Gilbert's stipend had gradually been reduced to just $300 a week, and over time, his father had also allegedly stopped paying for his rent. On the day of her son's visit, Gilbert's mother went out of the apartment to get him some food. Upon her return, she found her husband in a pool of blood with a pistol in his left hand. Investigators determined that the scene had been manipulated to make it appear as if the victim had taken his own life. It would eventually be revealed that Gilbert had shot his father in the head before fleeing the apartment. Court documents indicated that Gilbert had illegally purchased the weapon used to murder his father in Clarksburg, Ohio, roughly 7 months prior. In the aftermath of the incident, it emerged that Gilbert had been suffering from paranoid delusions since childhood. He'd felt slighted by his father's decision to decrease the financial support to which he'd become accustomed. As news of the patricide spread, many regarded Gilbert's greed as the motivating factor behind his plan to seek revenge against his father and ultimately end his life. Gilbert stood trial for the murder in 2019, and upon his conviction, he was sentenced to 30 years to life in prison. Number 5. Giovanni Michael Milianti. A SWAT team from the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office in Florida went to the Boynton Beach residence of a man suspected of dealing drugs on August 9th of 2017. Upon their arrival, law enforcement officers served the homeowner, named as Giovanni Michael Milianti, a warrant that granted them the authority to search the premises. The resulting arrest report detailed how the officers found more than 16 pounds of marijuana in Milianti's house, as well as other THC products, methamphetamine, a money counter, and approximately $32,000 in cash. In his subsequent interviews with investigators, 29-year-old Milianti revealed that for about 3 months leading up to his arrest, he'd been aware that local police was monitoring his home. The man allegedly told a member of the Palm County Narcotics Task Force that it was greed that had motivated him to continue selling illegal substances in spite of the obvious threat to his operation. Milianti was ultimately booked on several felony drug charges and 1 count of money laundering of $100,000 or more. Number 4. Vincent SISOUNONG and Blessing GAINEY. On October the 12th of 2013, Deep Rawat, a teenager from Kirkland, Washington, was awoken in the middle of the night by 2 men who'd broken into his parents' home. The intruders, one of whom was reportedly wielding a machete, pulled Rawat out of his bed. They then dragged him into the garage where they proceeded to methodically torture him. As was later recounted to investigators, the men repeatedly stabbed and sliced the teen's body with the blade, at one point allegedly telling him that they wanted to see him struggle for his life before they killed him. During the agonizing attack, the assailants reportedly went as far as attempting to hack off parts of Rawat's body, including his legs and head. The teen eventually managed to break free from his captors and set off a car alarm in the garage before running back into the house and hiding in the bathroom. One of the intruders fled the scene, but the other pursued Rawat back inside. With the machete in hand, he tried breaking through the bathroom door in an ambush attempt later compared to the famous "Here's Johnny" scene from the film The Shining. Upon realizing that he'd inadvertently trapped himself in the bathroom, Rawat reportedly punched his attacker in the face in a desperate effort to keep him at bay. The intruder then left the scene prior to the arrival of the police. In order to treat the various lacerations he'd sustained, Rawat was hospitalized for about a week after the incident. The authorities ultimately identified his attackers as 21-year-old Vincent SISOUNONG and Blessing Gainey, aged 19. The men were alleged to have broken into the Rawat's residence that night in order to commit a random thrill killing. They were said to have been motivated by greed and pleasure during the merciless assault, which left their victim with several visible scars on his body. Both SISOUNONG and Gainey pleaded guilty to attempted first-degree murder and first-degree burglary, and in October of 2014, they were each sentenced to 25 years in prison. Number 3. Lynette Alptekin. In April of 2022, it was reported that a woman from Derbyshire, England, had been arrested for allegedly stealing nearly $500,000 from her employer over the course of 4 years. In 2019, Lynette Alptekin had left Carlton Technologies, a family-run firm from Clay Cross. She had previously served in what was described as a position of trust for a number of years. The financial controller who began working at the company in Alptekin's stead reportedly came across 246 suspicious payments that had diverted funds from the firm into 10 different bank accounts. After bringing the information to the authorities, Carlton Technologies learned that their former employee had been siphoning company funds to her personal accounts, which she'd then used to bankroll a new car, a house, and vacations to Turkey. It subsequently emerged that the firm had been on the verge of going out of business because of Alptekin's unbridled greed. The woman ultimately pleaded guilty to 1 count of fraud by abuse of position and was consequently jailed for 3 years. Further reports detailed that Alptekin was pregnant at the time of her conviction, and she would therefore be required to give birth to her child behind bars. Today's topic was requested by Ramela Kame, Dove Master, and Blaze the Wolf. If you have any other topics you'd like to learn about, subscribe and let us know in the comments section below. Number 2. Jeffrey Neely. On September the 5th of 2016, the captain of the Metro Nashville Fire Department was cooking bacon for his dogs when a fire started at his home in White Bluff, Tennessee. 48-year-old Jeffrey Neely promptly contacted 911, and the local fire department sent a crew of 3 trucks to contain the flames. According to the chief of the volunteer White Bluff Fire Department, the blaze was a typical structure fire, which they were able to put out fairly quickly. Neely was taken to the TriStar Horizon Medical Center in Dixon after reportedly complaining of chest pains. The following morning at about 5 a.m., a passerby called 911 to report that Neely's home was on fire yet again. By the time firefighters arrived at the scene, the house had already collapsed. 2 days later, state arson investigators and the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation began looking into the cause of the 2 house fires. The incidents had occurred in rapid succession at the home of a man with extensive training and experience in preventing them. It was ultimately determined that Neely had started the fires himself in a greedy ploy to collect a payout for his home insurance policy. On October the 24th of 2017, the fire captain was taken into police custody and booked into the Dixon County Jail on arson charges. Number 1. Rod Kovlin. In December of 2009, the lifeless body of Shalay Danishevsky was found face down in a bathtub full of bloody water at her Upper West Side apartment in Manhattan, New York City. Investigators initially ruled the woman's death an accident, and her family requested that she be buried without an autopsy, in accordance with their Orthodox Jewish beliefs. In the months that followed the incident, suspicions began to mount concerning Danishevsky's estranged husband, Rod Kovlin, a former stockbroker turned professional backgammon player. Coughlin's behavior in the wake of his wife's death was described as erratic and dangerous, particularly when it came to his two children, Anna and Miles, who'd been placed in the custody of their paternal grandparents. In an apparent effort to reclaim guardianship of his children, Coughlin allegedly attacked his own mother and father, formulated a plan to murder them, and even fruitlessly tried to convince his daughter to accuse the latter of assaulting her. As was later detailed during the case's legal proceedings, Coughlin's attempts to gain custody of the children stemmed from his misguided belief that he'd also be granted access to the money left to them by their mother. Among the disturbing revelations associated with the case, it also emerged that Coughlin had plotted to kidnap Anna and take her to Mexico. Once out of the US, he would seek to emancipate her from her grandparents' guardianship by paying someone $10,000 to marry her. The abduction scheme fortunately never came to fruition, but Coughlin did attempt to frame his then 13-year-old daughter for her mother's murder by planting a false confession on her email account in June of 2013. The New York Times reported that in November of 2015, nearly 6 years after his estranged wife's death, Coughlin was arrested and charged with her murder. Investigators determined that the man had fatally strangled Danishevsky before arranging her body to make it appear as if she'd accidentally drowned. The victim had reportedly been in the process of removing Coughlin from her will, which would have prevented him from receiving $5 million in inheritance. In March of 2019, Coughlin was convicted of second-degree murder and consequently sentenced to 25 years to life in federal prison. Thanks for watching. Would you rather have friends who make you pay for everything or never be given what you want for birthdays and holidays? Let us know in the comments section below.